Whoops. Good evening, Chodesh Tov. We are in Rosh Chodesh, and it's a 2-day Rosh Chodesh. And what that actually means is that today, right now, just the last few hours, is the last day of Av, and tonight is actually the beginning of the Hebrew month of Elul, and that's why we didn't blow the shofar this morning, even though we were having Rosh Chodesh davening in synagogue. But tonight is the second day of Rosh Chodesh and the actual beginning of the month of Elul. And so with God's help, we'll be blasting the shofar tomorrow at our class. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house on a Tuesday, Yom Shlishi? And Chodesh Tov and Rosh Chodesh, Yehuda in South Carolina, Sharon in New Jersey, Joe in the Inland Empire, Shandora in the Bronx, Guy in Ohio, Bill in Mid-Missouri, Bella in Florida, Lorraine in Texas, Melissa in Great Neck, Tom in PA, Aoife in Florida, Frank in San Pedro, Ella, Chaim in Florida, Debbie in New Jersey, Marjorie in Georgia, and Debbie's got it. Tomorrow we blow the shofar. And every day of the month, the big wake-up call. Okay, our dafs today, we're going to do a double. We got a good head start on page 71 yesterday. We'll do 71 and 72. And with God's help, that will bring us to the end of chapter 4 here in Tractate Bava Basra, the 23rd volume of the Talmud. So we're continuing the Gemara, continuing the discussion of Mishna number 9 here in chapter 4, which is that when somebody's selling a field, these other very significant items like the cistern or the wine press or the dovecote are not part of the field itself. And so when one says, I am selling you a field, and the other says, I am buying a field, there's no assumption that these things would be included. If they wanted to include them in the sale, they could certainly do that, but they would have to specify that in the bill of sale, and without such specification, they're not included. So the Mishnah teaches, and now we're picking this up right near the bottom of page 71a. So the Mishnah teaches one who consecrates a field has consecrated all of it, right? So we're talking about transfers that we've talked about a sale and we've talked about a gift. So now we're talking about one who consecrates a field. That means he's basically made a donation of his field to the Holy Temple, or so let's say to the treasury for the upkeep of the temple. Now, does the treasury of the temple want this guy's field? What they really want, is something they can use in Jerusalem. Of course, when the temple is standing is when this kind of consecration really is happening. But the idea would be that he consecrated his field, so now he has to redeem the field. So in other words, what he said is, I'm going to give a donation equal to the value of my field. But until he redeems it, it's no longer his field. Now this field belongs to the temple treasury. And we should all remember that there's a very strong prohibition called hekdesh against making personal use, taking personal benefit from consecrated property. Now that's going to matter very much in today's discussion. So, one who consecrates a field has consecrated all of it. So Rav Huna said, even though the rabbi said, if one buys 2 trees in the field of another person, he does not acquire any of the land, but acquires only the trees, as opposed to having the trees and the land right under them. But in this case, if he only acquires the trees, then what? So Rav Huna said, even though the rabbi said that if one buys 2 trees in the field of another, hey, I'm buying those 2 trees in your field. So he does not acquire any of the land, but he acquires only the trees. And if one sells land to another, and he retains 2 trees, right? So the first case is somebody owns a field with 2 trees in it. So in the first case, he sells the 2 trees. And in the second case, he sells the land, but retains the 2 trees for himself. In that case, he retains the land. So there seems to be a distinction that if you sell the trees, you're selling only the trees. But if you sell the land while retaining the trees, you're retaining the trees and the land that is under them. But these rules do not always apply in that way. And Rav Huna explains. And even according to Rabbi Akiva, who says that one who sells generously and does not retain anything for himself, this does not always apply. As this statement of Rabbi Akiva applies only with regard to a pit and a cistern, which do not weaken the land, and therefore the seller feels no need to protect himself from the potential claims of the buyer. But with regard to trees, which do weaken the land as they draw water and nutrients from the soil, if it is so that the prior owner did not retain some of the land for himself, then let the buyer say to him, uproot your trees, take them and go, as the trees draw water and nutrients from my soil, which causes damage to my land that I have purchased. Therefore, the seller must have retained for himself the land needed to nurture these trees. And now we're on page 71b. So the Gemara raises an objection. We learned in the Mishna here that Rabbi Shimon says, one who consecrates a field has not consecrated any of the items that are ordinarily excluded from a sale, except for the grafted carob tree and the sycamore trunk. Now, we said that normally the grafted carob or the sycamore trunk, these are very significant trees, right? The grafted carob produces very valuable produce, the carob, and the sycamore trunk, this is a big tree that we use it to grow limbs out of it that are then cut for lumber. So these 2 trees are considered significant in their own right, and would not be considered part of a field that's used for farming crops. Okay, but here, and so normally if somebody says, I'm selling you a field and there's a grafted carob or a sycamore trunk on that field, so we just assume that the carob and the sycamore were not sold along with the field. However, if one consecrates his field, I hereby consecrate this field, meaning I'm giving it to the Holy Temple, and if I want to, let it be mine again to use, I'm going to have to give the value of what I consecrated in money to the Holy Temple so that the field becomes mine again. So it's like a sale in that it leaves my possession after I consecrate it. And if I want to get it back, I'm going to have to buy it. But whereas we say that those items are ordinarily excluded from a sale, they are included in a consecration. And can you guess what is the reason for that? We've already alluded to it. It's that those trees draw nutrients and water from the land around them. So if you consecrate the field and you don't include the grafted carob or the sycamore trunk along with that consecration, you would then have a situation where the field belongs to the Holy Temple, the trees still belong to me, but what is sustaining those trees? Nutrients and water that are found in the field that I have consecrated. which now belongs to the Holy Temple. So if my trees are being nourished by something that belongs to the Holy Temple, I am violating the prohibition on benefiting from consecrated property. Right, so we learned in the Mishna here that Rabbi Shimon says one who consecrates a field has not consecrated any of the items that are ordinarily excluded from a sale, except for the grafted carob tree and the sycamore trunk. And it is taught with regard to this in a baraisa. Rabbi Shimon said, what is the reason that it is specifically the carob tree and the sycamore trunk that are consecrated along with the land? Answer, since they draw their nutrients from a consecrated field, the owner must have had in mind to consecrate them as well, as otherwise his trees would be nurtured from consecrated property. And if it enters your mind, as Rav Huna claims, that when the seller retains certain trees for himself, he also retains the land around them so that they will be nurtured from soil that belongs to him, well then, what is the reason for Rabbi Shimon's ruling? When these trees draw water, draw their nutrients, they draw their nutrients from the ground that the consecrator has retained for himself that still belongs to him and not from consecrated property. So the Gemara continues and says, the assumption that Rav Huna's statement is true, according to everyone, this must be reconsidered. Rather, Rabbi Shimon, who says that one who consecrates his field does not retain for himself the land around the trees, he holds in accordance with the opinion of his teacher, Rabbi Akiva, who said that one who sells, sells generously. One who gives, gives generously. According to Rabbi Akiva, one who sells, sells generously, and there is no presumption that he retains some item or right for himself unless he stated it explicitly. Right? In the absence of an explicit exclusion from what he was selling, it's assumed that he sold everything. Therefore, Rabbi Shimon rules that one who consecrates his field has also consecrated the carob trees, as otherwise they would draw nutrients from consecrated land. And Rav Huna, who says that when a seller retains trees for himself, he also retains the land around them, he holds in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis who disagree with Rabbi Akiva, because they hold that one who sells sparingly, meaning only what's mentioned specifically is included in the sale, otherwise it's excluded from the sale. Now the Gemara asks if Rav Huna's statement is only in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis who disagree with Rabbi Akiva, then isn't his statement obvious? What novel idea is he adding? And the Gemara answers the practical difference is that while one might have thought that the prior owner retains a right to the land only for the sake of the trees that were there, this is not the case. Rather, he retains absolute ownership of the land. And therefore, if the trees fall or die, he can plant them again. Very important difference. What is he retaining? In the situation where he is retaining the land with the trees, does that mean he's retaining a right of access to his trees so that he can, harvest the fruit or the produce from those trees? He can get in and out of the field that he sold and work those trees in just the immediate land around them. So that's access. But if his trees die, then there's no need for the access and he retains nothing in that field. On the other hand, if what he retained for himself was an absolute ownership of the trees and the land around them, then if his trees die, he can replant new trees in that small plot of land that he retained for himself. Page 72a. The Gemara asks, but can you establish that the opinion of Rabbi Shimon is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Akiva? That one who sells or consecrates property does so generously? But we have a contradiction. Isn't it taught in a baraisa, if one consecrates 3 trees in a field where 10 trees are planted, in an area required for sowing 1 sa of seed, known as a base sa, that's a size of field. So he has consecrated not only those trees, but also the land and the young trees between them. Therefore, if this is an ancestral field of his, right, and a field meaning we're talking about continuously owned land in the land of Israel, right, in the times of the first and second temple, which was continuous from when Joshua led the children of Israel into the land, and where under Torah law, people knew, which parts of Israel they were living in, which tribe they lived, what tribe they were a member of, and which region was assigned to each tribe, and then subdivided within that the families, right? And so remember that under Torah law in the land of Israel, if you sell ancestral fields, you're not selling them forever. You're selling them for as many years as are left until the Yovel, right? The Jubilee year, which is every 50 years, at which time they return to their ancestral holdings. So what you're really selling is crop years. And there's a kind of specific price that you can redeem that field, get it back if you want to pay for it and get it back into your family. This is the case with ancestral holdings. So therefore, when he redeems them, he redeems the trees in accordance, therefore, if this is an ancestral field of his, when he redeems them, he redeems the land and everything contained within it according to the standard rate established by the Torah, whereby an area fit for the sowing, S-O-W-I-N-G, of a chomer, i.e. a core of barley seed, is redeemed for 50 silver shekels, right? An area that's used to grow a certain amount of barley, that size field is redeemed for 50 silver shekels. Now the Brisa continues, if the ratio of land to trees was less than this, meaning that the trees were planted more densely, or if the ratio of the land to trees was more than this, meaning that the trees were planted less densely, or if he consecrated each of the trees separately, one after the other, so this person has consecrated neither the land nor the young trees between them. Therefore, when he redeems them, he redeems the trees in accordance with their worth. And moreover, even if one consecrates the trees where they are planted more densely, less densely, or he redeems one, or he consecrates one at a time, and then afterward he consecrates the land. So if somebody, in other words, if somebody consecrated one tree, another tree, and then he consecrates the land around them, so that now everything belongs to the temple treasury, when he redeems them, he redeems the trees separately in accordance with their worth, and then he redeems the land according to the standard rate, where an area fit for the sowing of a homer of barley seed is redeemed for 50 silver shekels. In other words, if he was feeling generous and, he consecrated a tree and then he consecrated another tree and then he said, you know what, I'll just give the whole land. Then when he goes to redeem it, he can't just redeem the land and the trees go with it. Because he consecrated his trees separately, he's going to have to redeem them separately. Now, the Gemara clarifies. Whose opinion is expressed in this Baraisa? Why are we talking about this sequential redemption? Really to get at what happens when we consecrate a tree. Does the land around it go or not? Whose opinion is expressed in the Baraisa? It is the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. Doesn't he say... If it is the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, doesn't he say that one who sells generously, and all the more so, one who consecrates does so generously? So this being the case, even if the trees were consecrated, one after the other, some of the land should be consecrated along with them. And if the Baraisa reflects the opinion of the rabbis who disagree with Rabbi Akiva, don't they say in the Mishna that it is specifically the seller who sells sparingly? But one who consecrates generously. So it seems that the rabbis who disagree with Rabbi Akiva and Akiva all agree that one who consecrates generously, and therefore the pit and the winepress are consecrated along with the field. Therefore, the law stated here is not in accordance with either Akiva nor the rabbis. Rather, it is obvious that the Baraisa is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon in the Mishnah here, that even one who consecrates a field does not consecrate the cistern and the winepress along with it. Meaning that even one who consecrates does not necessarily consecrate generously. And the opinion of Rabbi Shimon is in accordance with the opinion of who? If it is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, doesn't he say that one who sells generously, and all the more so one who consecrates does so generously? So rather, it is obvious that his opinion is in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis who disagree with Rabbi Akiva and say that one who sells sparingly. And Rabbi Shimon disagrees with the rabbis insofar as he himself holds that just as one who sells sparingly, one who consecrates also consecrates sparingly and retains the land around the trees for himself. If he's going to retain the trees, he has to retain the land with them. Otherwise, he'd be drawing nutrients from land that is consecrated. Now we're on page 72b. So the Gemara concludes stating its difficulty, but this is difficult as Rabbi Shimon himself said that the grafted carob tree and the sycamore trunk are consecrated along with the field, since they draw the nutrients from a consecrated field, indicating that one who consecrates acts generously and does not retain the land around the trees for himself. So rather, it must be understood that when Rabbi Shimon stated his ruling in our Mishnah, he was not expressing his own opinion. Rather, he was speaking to the rabbis in accordance with their statement. And what he was trying to say was this: according to my opinion, just as one who sells sparingly, so too one who consecrates sparingly, and retains for himself the land around the trees to nurture them. Therefore, when one consecrates a field, even the sycamore and carob tree are not consecrated along with it. But according to your opinion, that one who consecrates, hold on a second. But according to your opinion, where am I? But according to your opinion, that one who consecrates does so generously, at least agree with me that one who consecrates a field has consecrated only the grafted carob and the sycamore trunk because they draw nutrients from the consecrated ground. But he has not consecrated the other items that are not integral parts of the field, like the cistern and the winepress. And the rabbis said to him, there is no difference between the two in this regard. Since one who consecrates an item does so generously, everything found in the field is consecrated. So the Gemara returns to the Baraisa that it had concluded was taught according to the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. And now the Gemara asks, in accordance with which opinion did you interpret the Baraisa discussing consecrated property? It was interpreted in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. But say that the last clause, where it said, and moreover, even if one consecrates the trees, and then afterward he consecrates the land, when he redeems them, he redeems the trees separately in accordance with their worth, and then he redeems the land according to the standard rate, where an area fit for the sowing of a homer of barley seed is redeemed at 50 silver shekels. And if the Baraisa is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, let him follow the character of the field at the time of its redemption. And so, the trees should be redeemed along with their land, as at the time of the redemption, both the trees and the land are already consecrated. As we have already heard, that Rabbi Shimon follows the time of redemption, i.e. he determines the price at which a field is redeemed based on its value at the time of redemption, not at the time of consecration. As it is taught in a Baraisa, from where is it derived that with regard to one who purchases a field from his father, and then he consecrates it, and afterward his father dies, so the field would now be considered his as an inheritance? So from where is it derived that with regard to its redemption, it should be considered before him as an ancestral field and not a field that he purchased, which would have a different cost to redeem, an ancestral field versus one that you simply own because you bought it? Now the verse states about a field that was purchased, quote, and if he sanctifies to the Lord a field that he has bought, which is not of his ancestral fields, that's Leviticus 27:22, and the verse speaks specifically of a field that is not fit at the time of its consecration to be called an ancestral field, meaning that he never could have inherited it in the future. So this specification excludes this field that we're talking about that was fit to be an ancestral field from this law, since eventually it would have become his through inheritance, even had he not purchased it. And this is the statement of Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon. All right, so if somebody stands to inherit a field from his father when his father dies, but his father's healthy, he's going to live many years, is not using the field. And so the son says, you know what, Dad, I'll buy the field from you. So he buys the field from him, and at a certain point he consecrates it, and now he wants to redeem it. So what's going to be the cost of redemption? Is it the cost of redeeming a field that you own simply because you purchased it? Or is it the cost of redeeming a field that is an ancestral field, which gets redeemed at a different rate? Now, this field would eventually become his as an ancestral field when his father dies. His father is alive, thank God. You know, and that's why he owns it now as a product of a purchase. But since he will inherit it later, the law should apply to him in terms of ancestral fields, not purchased fields. But according to Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, a verse is not required to teach that. In a case where his father dies and afterward he consecrates the field, it is considered to be an ancestral field, as this is obvious. A verse is required only to teach the law in a case where he consecrates the field after having bought it, and afterward his father dies. Now the Gemara asks, from where do Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon arrive at this conclusion? If they derive it only from this verse, you can say that the verse came to be interpreted in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Meir, as opposed to the opinions of Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, as there is no clear proof from the verse to support either opinion. So rather, is it not due to the fact that they follow the time of redemption? And at the time of the redemption, the father is dead and the field is the son's ancestral field that is currently in the possession of the temple treasury, but he can redeem it at the price used for redeeming ancestral field. So Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak says, actually I can say to you that generally speaking, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon do not follow the time of the redemption, and therefore their ruling here is not based on this premise. But here they found a verse and interpreted it as, if the verse is to be understood as it was explained by Rabbi Meir, then the verse should have written, and if he sanctifies to the Lord a field that he has bought, which is not his ancestral estate, or the verse could have written, which is not his ancestral field. What is meant by the expression, which is not of his ancestral fields? It means that a field that is not fit to ever be an ancestral field is considered a purchased field, and this is to the exclusion of the field we're talking about in this case, as it is fit to be his ancestral field, even though he hasn't inherited it yet. So based on this explanation, the Baraisa that addresses one who consecrates trees can in fact to be understood to be in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. We're talking about the price at the time of redemption or at the time of consecration only to establish whose opinion are we dealing with generally, Rabbi Shimon or Rav Huna, Rabbi Akiva, the rabbis, and that's going to help us understand what other nuances are included here. Now Rav Huna says, a grafted carob and a sycamore trunk have both the status of a tree and the status of land. And this is because they are very significant trees. Each of these has the status of a tree, because they're trees. So if one consecrates or buys two trees and this carob or sycamore, he has also consecrated or bought the land between them, as the sycamore or carob joins with the other two trees to form a unit of three trees that take their land with them. Right? If you buy three trees, it's like you got a triangle and you got the land along with them. And each has the status of land, as these kinds of trees are so significant that they are not sold along with the land, as explained in our Mishna, that if you sell a field and you don't specify that you're including the grafted carob or the sycamore trunk, they don't go along with the land. And this is similar to a neighboring field. In other words, they're treated as significant like a separate field. And Rav Huna says in a similar fashion, a large sheaf of grain that contains 2 sa, very large sheaf, has both the status of a sheaf and the status of a heap with regard to the laws of forgotten sheaves that must be left for the poor. It has the status of a sheaf, as the principle is that 2 sheaves that were inadvertently left in the field are considered forgotten sheaves that must be left for the poor, whereas 3 sheaves are more significant than that and need not be left for the poor, but rather the owner of the field may go back and take them for himself. In this regard, a 2 sa sheaf is considered 1 sheaf. So if one forgot 2 sheaves and also this sheaf that contains 2 sa. The 3 together are 3 sheaves and are not considered forgotten sheaves that must be left for the poor. And if it has the status of a heap, as we learned in the Mishna, which said that in the case of a sheaf that contains 2 sa, meaning a large sheaf, if one forgets it in a field, it is not considered as a forgotten sheaf that must be left for the poor, as its size and importance grant it the status of a heap rather than a sheaf. I'm very close to done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. Rabba Bar Chana says that Reish Lakish says, with regard to whether a grafted carob and a sycamore trunk are consecrated along with a field that one is consecrated, we have arrived at the dispute between Rabbi Menachem Bar Yosei and the rabbis, as Rabbi Menachem Bar Yosei rules that they are not consecrated, whereas the rabbis rule that they are. And now just at the top of 73a, the Gemara asks, but let us say that this is the dispute between Rabbi Shimon and the rabbis that we've been talking about. As it was concluded previously, that according to Rabbi Shimon himself, even the carob and the sycamore trees are not consecrated. And the Gemara answers, Reish Lakish teaches us this, that Rabbi Menachem, the son of Rabbi Yosei, holds in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. And therefore, Rabbi Shimon is not the only sage who holds this opinion, but nevertheless, it is a minority opinion. And that concludes chapter 4 here in Tractate Bava Basra. And with God's help, tomorrow, Wednesday at 6 p.m. Pacific, the regular time, we will open chapter 5, one who sells a ship. Okay, Lucy has a question. But when one consecrates a field, is that not a gift to the temple? And then isn't the field given generously with everything in it? Well, that's what they're arguing about. And the majority opinion agrees with you. Yeah, you're one who consecrates generously, even more, we would think, than one who sells. According to Rabbi Akiva, one who sells generously, and all the more so one who consecrates generously. And even the rabbis who disagree with Rabbi Akiva say that one who sells sparingly, but one who consecrates generously. So absolutely, that is how they understand it. However, this is all in the absence of specification. It's not that because you're feeling, that you want to do a mitzvah, you want to make a big donation to the temple. Doesn't mean you're going to give away everything you own. You have to decide how much you're giving away. And when you do, you should just be careful to specifically say what it is that you're giving. Lucy also says, do fields that are gifted also return to the ancestral land at the Jubilee year? I believe so. Yes. There is a way that they could go out of the ancestral holding, right? If they're consecrated and they're consecrated in a particular way. I forgot what the particulars are. There is a way that it would never come back to the family. But for the most part, whether you were selling, giving, or giving, for sure comes back. Does consecration come back? I think so, but not always. Not always. Joe says, buying a piece of land until the Jubilee year sounds a lot like a lease in our culture. Yes, it does. Just so. And Frank says, what is a sheave? A sheaf. Sheaves is the plural of sheaf. And people with, agricultural experience will know better than me, but I'm pretty sure that a sheaf is like, when you cut down a whole bunch of grain, and you're doing it by hand, as they did in the ancient world, not with a big combine harvester. So once you, gathered enough of these, cut stalks, you would tie them together and leave the sheaf standing there. Then later you would come with your wagon and throw the sheaves into the wagon. But if you left 2 sheaves in the field, 1 or 2, you don't go back for them. And it's interesting because this is a law that applies to things you've forgotten. If you leave it there on purpose, it's not forgotten. You don't have to give it to the poor. You have to leave the corners unharvested for the poor. You have to leave the gleanings, things that just drop as you're harvesting, so that the poor can come and pick that up. But in terms of sheaves, they only belong to the poor if you forgot 1 or 2, then you don't go back and get it. But if you forgot 3, then that's more significant than what is gifted to the poor, so you can go back and pick that up. Okay, that's what I've got for us today, and with God's help, be together again tomorrow, and God willing, we'll have some shofar blasts. Good Chodesh, have a great night.